Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, for those in person and online. As Bobby mentioned, my name is Danielle Santos. I lead international engagement for the NICE program at NIST, and we're really focused on advancing cybersecurity education and workforce. So I'm happy to see so many gathered today and throughout the last few days focusing on how cybersecurity games and hands-on activities can help build that cybersecurity workforce. I'm so happy to be joined today by Ms. Despina Spanou. I knew I was going to mess that up. We even practice it, but it really is a joy to be together today. And we had a little preview of what Despina does in the EU, but since I got my hands on a bio, I did want to read a few things that I thought were really awesome accomplishments. So Ms. Spanou is the head of cabinet, or as she describes, the chief of staff, of the vice president of the European Commission. And in this capacity, she coordinates the implementation of the EU Security Union Strategy for 2020 through 2025. This is the first ever EU strategy encompassing the whole spectrum of security work in the EU, ranging from counterterrorism, cybercrime, cybersecurity, and hybrid threats. Prior to this, she has been the director for Digital Society, Trust, and Cybersecurity, where she led the European Commission's work on cybersecurity policy and law, digital privacy, and more. And this morning, we heard about, or I think maybe in some of our casual conversations, we've talked a little bit about your background and how you don't come from a traditional cybersecurity, computer science kind of pathway. So I'm wondering if we can just start our talk today by hearing from you on what your pathway was into cybersecurity and how you found your role today.
Thank you very much, and thank you to those who took the time to be here for this chat. So yes, I'm a fake. I didn't study technology. I studied law. I studied European law. But I studied how to design, implement, and enforce laws. And this was my job in the European Commission, which is the executive branch of the European Union, for those who may not know, which is normal. And I found myself in this job leading digital-related work, including cybersecurity. And I happened to be, I think, the person in the right place at the right time, because in the EU, we tend to go for the regulatory approach in all policies. And we had decided to take the carriage and do the same in cybersecurity. It was not obvious. In the EU, we always do things as a group. We are 27 countries. You will hear me referring to member states. That's EU talk for governments. So we're 27 countries that always join forces to do everything together. But in cybersecurity, there was always a hesitancy. And it's normal because in security, what you learn is to keep information to yourself, not to share it. So we decided it was no longer possible for 27 countries that are connected otherwise to not share information in cybersecurity with systems that are interconnected. All our data is interconnected between the 27. And it was actually the data protection regulation that led the way. So it was, in fact, the very first law that was sanctioning not reporting data breaches, which was a kind of cybersecurity incident. So we thought now we need to talk about cybersecurity. We didn't dare talk about cybersecurity as a policy, even in the very first cybersecurity legislation in the world. That's known as the NIS directive. Many of you know it. It's a critical infrastructure cybersecurity law. And if you read its title, it talks about NIS stands for Network and Information Systems. People think that the S is for security. We didn't dare, because governments wouldn't let us at the time. So that has changed in the last 7 years, and I happened to be in positions where I was dealing with security in the last 7 years. So since then, being a lawyer has helped us gather the right skills, because we will be talking about skills, to come forward with a very big ecosystem that includes things like what is happening here today. Team Europe is led by the European Union Cybersecurity Agency, which is a fundamental component of the cybersecurity ecosystem in Europe. So we decided to go all the way, from resilience to products to services, and today more to operational cybersecurity for all 27 countries. Common standards, common rules for 27 countries.
That sounds like a big feat, a lot of kind of bringing people together. You talk about the collaboration and how each country, has different priorities, different things they're focusing on, and bringing them under one umbrella to be able to talk about security openly and transparently. I think that's a big leap forward. So I think one of the main things we're here to talk about today is something you previewed earlier this morning, the Cybersecurity Skills Academy, which was just announced earlier this spring. So I was wondering if you could maybe take us back a few steps and just give the high-level overview of what that Skills Academy is and what the primary goals are for that academy.
Thank you. Indeed, I'm here to talk about that because in the room next door we have some of the world's best talents and skills and the people that may lead the cybersecurity of the world in the coming years. So we're looking for talents like that. But it takes a little bit more than that. In April, we announced this project called the European Union Cybersecurity Skills Academy, which for now is offered in a virtual manner. You can find it in something that is called the Digital Jobs and Skills Platform. So if you Google that, you'll enter. And the idea is to create a single point of entry for anything that has to do with cybersecurity skills. Anything from funding, jobs opportunities, jobs offers, training, certification, education, anything that has to do with cybersecurity and that will enhance our skills capacity. We know that the skills gap is enormous across the world. In Europe, we have now estimated it to some 800,000 jobs for the upcoming regulatory rules that we are putting in place. Because in Europe, we keep putting rules into place. Critical infrastructure, extended scope, extended to pharmaceuticals, medical devices, food, you name it. So everything is now critical. But the question is, who is going to implement all those rules, both on the public side, but on the private side as well? Because you put more and more burden on operators to enforce these rules, to implement these rules, but you need also the government to control the markets and to implement them. So we realized that we're never going to make it. And we also realized that cybersecurity suffers from the misconception of its technical nature. So not a lot of people dare to go to this area and seek opportunities in educating themselves or training themselves, upskilling, or whatever it may take to get into this market that is an enormous market. I understand even in the United States, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs and vacancies right now. So we wanted to create this one single point of entry also as a means of measuring how many jobs we manage to address and to fill. Because we hear today a lot of big players who are training people and who have education programs across the world, and they're talking about hundreds of thousands of opportunities, but we don't see these jobs being filled. So the idea is to bring together under one house all existing initiatives, including from the private world, but all these initiatives have to meet certain criteria so that this house becomes also a validation place where people that offer opportunities get recognized, and then these opportunities are found. So we're trying to address both the supply and the demand side at the same time.
Wow, that's really great. And one of the goals here of the International Cybersecurity Conference and competition is focusing on filling some of those, I think it's 3.4 million jobs globally that one of the reports have stated. So that's a lot of work for us to do. And I think that's pulling together all those resources and programs, and as you were mentioning, the standardization and measurement of that is helping to feed that. That's 3.4 million, that's a lot. We aren't going to fill it by continuing to do the same things that we've been doing. I think pulling in some of the diversity, which is also one of the goals here at the conference, is thinking about innovative ways to bring in talent and skills. Do you have any thoughts about the diversity piece in cybersecurity and how we might change some of those approaches to reach more diverse audiences in more diverse ways?
Well, the diversity is absolutely necessary in cybersecurity, not only in in the usual sense of diversity, that you need all types of people, all sexes, or, all nationalities, all cultures. You need that diversity in any field that is human-related, in any anthropocentric field, such as cybersecurity. But we need diversity because it's a multidisciplinary field. And this is the misconception we're fighting against, that we need people from all disciplines. We need lawyers like myself, we need economists, we need people that are in law enforcement, we need people that understand how the world works. And it is one of the things we try to achieve by making through this academy the issue visible, because it is not, and offering these opportunities already to schools. So we're including school programs under the academy for those schools that want to have them, so that people start from education. We're including university programs, so we are connecting universities that are offering degrees in cybersecurity across Europe, so that you can have multiple opportunities to fill in different parts of the field. And we are introducing courses, actually, in various types of degrees in cybersecurity, so cybersecurity law, for instance, or cybersecurity enforcement, cybersecurity economics, a discipline extremely necessary for tackling cybercrime, for instance, etc. And then we're tackling another issue, which is the lack of women talent in the sphere. We have discussed earlier, we created this Women for Cyber initiative in the European Union, and this is not just about equal opportunities. It's because we need all the talents and all the brains that we can have. So Women for Cyber is seeking to address this gap that we have. We only have 19% of graduates in the European Union in the ICT sector, and only 20% of women in the workforce of cybersecurity. So we're looking at increasing it, because if you bring more women, well, you necessarily bring more people. So already you increase the numbers. So this is one of the areas we hope to tackle. But again, you need to do it in a holistic way. You don't need to target specific, the academy is not targeting specific categories of people, but it offers the visibility of the field and encourages people to join the field. This is the idea, that you make it accessible and reachable, and that you offer people not just by talking, but by also offering. For instance, one of the main deliverables of the academy is that we're asking private companies to offer pledges that are tactile and that are meaningful, offering jobs or trainings or any other opportunities that they have for cybersecurity, and making sure that these are accessible to all. And we are imposing on these pledges, if they want to have the name of the Cybersecurity Academy, to be measurable. So they need to be able to tell us every 6 months how many jobs have been uptaken by the people that were trained or certified, etc., and how many people fulfill the diversity aspect. We already have 5 pledges of this kind. They are public. They come from big, mostly American companies. We have 2 European and 3 American. And we look forward to see how now the measurement is going to start. So that will also help us identify if the diversity gap is being addressed.
Yeah, and I want to pull a little bit on that thread of public-private cooperation and collaboration. You mentioned this pledging program brought into the Skills Academy. Are there other activities or initiatives that are ongoing within the EU, maybe at large, as far as collaboration and coming together to build the cybersecurity workforce?
Absolutely. So when we proposed the European Cybersecurity Skills Academy, we proposed also a piece of legislation called the European Union Solidarity Act. And that is the EU's first effort to go for a collaboration on the operational side of cybersecurity. So how do we work together when we have large-scale incidents? How do we collect together threat assessments? How do we assess post-event incidents? So we have introduced, for instance, an incident review mechanism that brings together the 27 governments, and they decide whether they need to fix something or do things differently. And we have also created for the first time, and this is probably a first in the world, the Solidarity Reserve, which will allow certified individuals and companies that offer trusted services under a European scheme to be included in a reserve list for people that will be called upon in case we have a large-scale incident. Because we know that if there is a big cyber attack, No country will have enough people to lend to others. They will want to keep them for themselves, and that's normal. We know they don't have enough anyway. And everybody will be looking for help. And it is the first time that public governments will be able to draw from a list, also from individuals coming from the private sector, but who meet specific criteria set out in the legislation. This legislation is under negotiation, but we see a great willingness from governments to take it up. So this is a new way of doing things. This is putting the like-minded, whether they are from the public or from the private sector, together to fight the malicious actors.
I think that's awesome. And one of the stories here that's happened just this week that really gave you that warm, fuzzy feeling inside was how different countries are working together on a team to meet needs. We saw here a team that wasn't able to make it out. So the other teams pulled together some members and helped them on the first day of the competition, and they formed their own team. And that was really an amazing example of how people from different areas, different backgrounds can come together and really work together in a setting like this. One of the other things I wanted to come back to is this morning you talked a little bit about getting outside of your box. And I think we were talking about an example of people doing some rotational type programs, seeing things from a different view and lens point. These exercises that you just talked about coming together, how does that help kind of get people out of their box?
Well, in Europe, we started these exercises at the level of governments already some years ago. Our European Cybersecurity Agency, NISA, carries out Cyber Europe every 2 years. It's a big exercise, usually with a topic that is close to the geopolitical agenda, or that becomes very obvious from the threat landscape. And we have all 27 governments working together so that they can identify their own vulnerabilities, but also to create this system of collaboration, a culture of networking between the countries. And we have seen in real life incidents how that has worked, how having the right instruments in place for people to collaborate works. So in Europe we have it. We have a network of CERTs, of the government CERTs that have regular meetings, but they also know who to call in case of an incident, and they can warn each other, they can share best practices, they can fight against something together. We have now raised that to the management, to the decision-making level. So we have the EU Cyclone, which is the decision-making level network, so that also decisions can be taken, because, okay, you can be the operational team and you can fight and you can settle things, but you also need sometimes political decisions to be made. So we have taken care of that, and we believe this is a model that we now want to take more global. And what's happening here is really a very good example. I don't know who to call. I know who to call in every single country in case we have a large-scale incident, but I don't know who to call in the US. I don't know who to call in Canada. And I think that's the next step. And this is the good example that these international challenges are setting up, because these kids will grow up and will have that in them. That, yes, we play attack and defense against each other every day, but the day that we have the common enemy and we're the like-minded against us, we know how to work together.
Right, and it's also the networking piece. These students, these athletes are all meeting each other when they're not trying to attack each other on the games, and they're making those connections so that when they are in the jobs later down the line, they'll hopefully know who to call. So that's wonderful.
Well, for instance, in Europe, we now also propose that our security operations centers in each government now have a connection to all other governments. It's a difficult one, but it will improve a lot the flow of threat assessments, of addressing certain new challenges. Everybody's talking about AI and cybersecurity. And again, this is the idea, that people know how to talk to each other while preserving, of course, all the rights and sovereign rights when it comes to governments to defend themselves as they see please. And that's always provided in European laws. But beyond that, you need to be able to work together. The war in Ukraine was an excellent example of that. Whereas we are not a big power of cybersecurity, and the Ukrainians know very well what to do. They have a fantastic IT army. As soon as the aggression started, the US sent forces, and we did the same at the European Union level. And everybody's now working together. They don't have silos. And this is what has helped also prevent catastrophe from happening. Everybody is wondering every day, how come we haven't had a super large-scale incident in the context of that war? And that's because everybody is working together, and there's a lot of intelligence effort and sharing, and that obviously helps with prevention.
Mm-hmm. Good points. So one of the other things I wanted to come back to that you briefly mentioned this morning is the education piece, and I know education and training is going to be a big part of, or is a big part, of the Cybersecurity Skills Academy, and you specifically mentioned when we were on that topic the different levels, so secondary, post-secondary education, moving into professionals, moving into C-suite. How will the Skills Academy address all those different levels, and how will it determine the education and training needs for those different levels?
Well, there are different modules under the Academy, depending on the level of education. But then the Academy will also allow private schemes to enter the Academy. The idea of the Academy is that it is a house, and anybody who wants to respect the house rules is welcome to live in it. So if you have private initiatives for training or certification, they can be validated and they can be part of the supply of the academy. And it's the same for education systems. If you have an educational module that meets certain criteria that are clearly set out in the academy's mandate, then you can be part of what is offered.
Mm-hmm. And that actually leads me to one more thing I wanted to ask you about is the schemas, the standards around how we're defining these things. We have from NIST the Workforce Framework for Cybersecurity, which describes skills and knowledge and tasks in cybersecurity work. I know ANISA last year published their cybersecurity skills framework as well. How will frameworks like that or other standards for cybersecurity work play into the education and training components of the Skills Academy?
NISA's cybersecurity skills framework is one of the pillars. It's a framework, for those that may not know, that has identified 18 types of jobs in cybersecurity and the skills that have to come with it. Now, with every set, there come standards, at least with most of them. And these standards can be international. We do not require European standardization systems. The idea is to have internationally recognized standards that are accepted by everyone, that can be part of these skills frameworks. So we do start with the European skills framework because it was a piece of work that I think it has become now a reference. We have more and more companies that adopt it. But of course, when the standards are common, other skills frameworks like the NIST one can come in without any problem. But again, it is all a matter of accepting the house rules.
So it sounds like even other countries can get involved, even though this is the EU Cybersecurity Skills Academy. There's room for other countries to come in and get involved as well.
Absolutely. This is the same for our funding programs. Our funding programs allow funding for non-EU companies. Again, the idea is to fill in those jobs no matter where they are. It is not in our interest in the EU that we take that we fill only our vacancies, because that creates a gap somewhere else. The idea is that we try to address our skills gap and our talents gap, but that we also try to address it across the world. And we hope that the Academy will also have global partners. We have started working on specific cybersecurity challenges with many governments across the world. For instance, for the first time, the EU has a ransomware working group with the Department of Homeland Security in the US. This is an example of best practice where operational people work together. You have ANISA having working arrangements now with the CISA. So the Academy can be the same. It can become a hub that connects to similar initiatives we hope that we will see, for instance, in the United States or in Canada. And why not in other parts of the world?
All right, so anyone out there who you can get involved now, start thinking about that. I also want to open it up for questions in a moment from the audience. But before we do, one last question for you is about these students out here. They studied, some of them for the past year, to get to this point, and it's wrapping up today with their final competition. If you could give them a piece of advice as they're looking forward to their cybersecurity careers, some of them just starting in their careers, what is, I guess, one piece of advice or thing you would like them to walk away from in this experience and really take away with them as they leave this event and head off into the rest of their studies or careers?
Well, I think that they have chosen the right path. They will find always a job. But if I had one piece of advice, judging from any sector, so judging from experience, you need to continue upskilling yourself. And cybersecurity, when you see the threat landscape between 2020 and the provisions for 2030, it's changing constantly. So you need to continue upskilling yourself. So this is not the end. It's a very good beginning, but it is not the end. You need to continue being relevant. And one thing I would tell the operational guys, like most of the guys in this room, one piece of advice: every morning read the newspaper. It's very important when you operate in the cybersecurity field that you remain relevant geopolitically. This is the best way for knowing where the next threat will come from, because it's not where you expect it. Operational people today know how to deal with malware, with ransomware, with the typical cybersecurity challenges. But the big ones are still out there. So it's very important that you stay informed and that you have a global understanding of the world. I think that applies to any security job, but in cyber it's very, very important. And
digital newspapers are okay, right?
Yeah. I didn't specify whether it should be paper or not. Are there still paper newspapers?
I was just wondering that.
Can you still buy a paper newspaper? I don't know.
All right. Well, I'd love to invite the audience here. If there are any questions, please let me know. I see a couple of hands already, so I'm not sure if we have another mic we can give to folks, or you can just come up here. Thank you.
I had the absolute pleasure of being in Hamar last month with meeting of ANISA. We had our National Cyber League Symposium there, and I'm very impressed with everything that you're doing, and I apologize.
It could be important.
Now, my passion is measuring performance in cyber like we measure athletic performance. So I love your concept of the Skills Academy. We have a disconnect between human resources, between the way companies go about finding and hiring talent. We don't have that problem in athletics. You know, the professional teams know how to spot talent. They know how to measure talent, and you can measure this talent from an early age. Will we get to the point where we can measure the skills at the level that will impress those hiring so that we'll be on the same page with how we develop these cyber athletes for going into the cybersecurity profession? Because I don't like the disconnect, but I think what you're doing with the Skills Academy, with your partnering with companies, really is a step in the right direction. But I want your thoughts on how far we can go for measuring the performance.
I think the first thing to do is to get people on the jobs. Excelling in the job is great, and that comes with all these types of events and all these types of initiatives, because they teach you how to become better and better. You learn from your peers, and that's fantastic. But I think now the challenge is to get people on the job, and then you can identify the best. So I think you need a parallel track of this kind of competitions and other types of challenges that allow people to test their limits and to become better. But right now, identifying the talent is identifying people who can do the job.
Is it those that hire that can really be involved in measuring talent rather than a sport competition, have the actual folks hire be directly involved in measuring?
The Academy's point is about that if you make a pledge that you're going to offer whatever is your offer, you need to be able to show how many people got a job with that afterwards. So we start from that. Now, there's a parallel track of encouraging this type of events, because we need those It's part of the upskilling in a way as well. But first, we need to get people to the jobs. Before we go to the championship, we need the local competitions. So.
Yeah, thank you. You talked about the Skills Academy, fantastic stuff. This is the first time I'm hearing about it. My question is around individuals that you may be looking to reskill out of other fields, out of their careers. They've, maybe worked in medicine or in your case, law. And how do you encourage them, and what does their experience going through the Skills Academy look like if they're 40, 50, looking to transition into a cyber career?
Yeah, upskilling and reskilling is a very big chapter, and it's probably the most difficult. So this is where in the first pillar, as we've designed it, it looks like a Greek temple because I'm Greek, and so is my boss. So one of the pillars on education and training is about that. We are asking companies, we're asking certification organizations to offer opportunities to those who do not come from the field, from the technical field, and who want to reskill and upskill. So this is a very big challenge, but it is part of why we did this. You're absolutely spot on. And you're part of the US team?
I run the US Cyber Games program.
Very good. Well done.
Actually, it might be more a comment of what the gentleman said. It made me think. Somehow, hearing the term athlete didn't really go over well with me, and I tried to explain why. Athletes are trained to win races or competitions. I don't think that's what we need. I think we need people who have potential more than performance. So anyone who has seen the 9-box exercise, you normally rate in companies people by performance and potential. I rather hire someone who is not going to win any race, but has the potential to grow over time and gives back that experience and that path to others. It's a multiplier effect, because otherwise we're just going to repeat the same problem all over again, but we try to raise experts and athletes, but we can't fill 3.4 million open jobs with that approach. That's just my take on that.
We have a question over here.
Thank you so much. I like the discussion, and especially the approach that the European Union has actually been employing. I'm really fascinated how you managed to coordinate, especially for 27 countries. And for us, that's half of Africa, in terms of the number of countries we have. If we can achieve that half, that is really going to be a serious development in terms of how we can maneuver. My question really is, what was your entry point in really coordinating those efforts for even the frameworks, the regulations, to bring all the 27 countries to be speaking one voice, especially considering that technology really transition at a faster pace, and at the rate at which sometimes even laws and bills are passed into different governments and etc. That's one thing that I'm really trying to get my head around. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's a very fair point, but I must admit that in the EU we started with a good basis, because we already have a common set of rules for how we run what we call the internal market. So you know that these 27 countries have no borders. Everything circulates free: people, services, money. So we took the fact that we are interconnected as the basis, and we didn't want anybody to be the weak link, because there were governments that had very strong capacity in cybersecurity, and you can imagine which these are. Not just the big ones like France or Germany, but you have countries like Lithuania or Estonia that are super strong in cybersecurity. And that's where geopolitics are very interesting, because you have to think where they come from, and that explains also the Ukrainian capacity. Okay, so but then there were countries that had zero cybersecurity approach, scattered services across the government, no cybersecurity strategy, didn't realize who was a critical operator or not, critical infrastructure operator or not. So the idea was that everybody had to reach the same level playing field, and nobody could operate as the weak link, because all our systems are interconnected. So that made it a little bit easier in the acceptance, if you like.
It's that free rider problem, right? You need to make sure that no one is a free rider and everybody is pulling their own weight, accomplishing that never-ending.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. You all know about this COVID certificate that ruled our lives. So we never see it again for a couple of years. This is a database that was created at EU level for all 27 governments. So they're all interconnected. So anyone who can get in one country's system can access, and here we're talking personal health data. Some countries connect their digital identity passports, so really big stuff. So imagine someone who can get in, how much information can have access from other countries. So everybody has an interest to build their systems to be solid. This is why when we reviewed the NIS directive, we included public administrations in the scope, which was a no-go before, interestingly. Governments, when we're negotiating, were willing to add to the notion of critical infrastructure on top of transport, energy, health. They added food, pharmaceuticals, etc., but they didn't want themselves. In the meantime, they're the most highly impacted organizations when they suffer a cyber attack because they don't have the means to deal with it. So we included public administration again because they're interconnected, our governments. We have data systems that connect 27 different administrations. So that made it a little bit easier.
Time for one more question.
Hello, thank you. Great panel, great panelist, great information. Now, thinking from a vulnerability standpoint, since all of the European nations have this one, you mentioned one point of entry, some would say one point of failure. Thinking from the other side, it's great to collaborate. It's great to have all, teams rise at the same time. What would be the plan, if you can tell us anything, if that fails? That point of entry, that house that you're speaking about, if that gets, unfortunately, compromised. So if you can talk to that a little bit.
If this effort fails, you mean?
I think the question is, you have potentially a single point of failure. How is the Skills Academy?
If the academy itself was compromised.
I think the EU infrastructure, yeah.
Well, again, for every system we have of course the relevant counter offense and the relevant protection of the system. So I don't think that differs from anything else. So we have our own CERT EU. We have an EU systems actually CERT that takes care of all that on a daily basis, because we are also organizations that become often the victims of cyber attacks. When it comes to the infrastructure for the academy itself, it will be a challenge because today it is only digital, it is only virtual, and eventually it will be something that will connect many countries. Today we have a proposal from 18 governments to host the academy, so that they will link together, and there will be one that will have the headquarters, but it will be a common project. So they will have to have some of the most secure systems to be able to house all that. But this is no different from anything else. And again, because we have imposed the same conditions as for critical infrastructure on ourselves, on the European institutions, the level of cybersecurity norms that apply is actually very high. So we have as good a shield as a critical infrastructure operator should have, if that answers your question.
I think last thoughts. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I think that I'm going to take inspiration from this last question. What if the academy fails? What if this project fails? I don't, because you scared me. I thought that was your question. But now you made me think about it. And I think no effort can ever fully fail. There will always be something that's left. I'm very encouraged by the fact that 3 months on, we had 5 pledges from big companies with a certain level of stress because they submit their pledges and you have to approve it. So I think the moment you give encouragement and you signal that there is an effort, usually people want to join. So we want everybody to join. So this is the message that I'd like to pass. This has to be a global effort of the like-minded, always. It's a team sport, cybersecurity, and this is what this event is about, so let's keep the team going.
I like that. It's a team sport.
Absolutely.
I want to thank Danielle and Despina. I'm not going to get your name right. Spanou, very much. This was really a phenomenal conversation. I think I said every conversation's been better than the last, and we certainly saved the best for last. So thank you all for being here today.